we have to be asking ourselves the question, what would a world look like where the United States is not the largest superpower? We have to be asking ourselves. If you're not asking yourself that question, you're just staring at a wall. You're blinding yourself. Mm-hmm. We have to be asking ourselves the question, what do we do as a country, and what do you do as an individual if America is not at the top of the mountain anymore? Economists are predicting that by 2033, China will be the largest superpower in the world. The largest military and the largest economy.
Do you agree with that?
If you're looking at empirical evidence, absolutely. If nothing changes between now and 2033, they might even get there faster. So we have to accept the fact that the world is changing. Now, there's still a long time. That's 10 years. That's a decade between now and 2033. Mm-hmm. Can we effect changes now that prevent that from happening? I think we can. They'd have to be pretty radical changes, but I think we can do it. But if we just turn a blind eye and we say it's never going to happen, if we just ignore it, if we put our faith in politicians to do it for us, I'm not so sure it's going to happen in that case, right? So, but that's the biggest question I ask myself every day is, what does my life look like as a 50-year-old man if America is not the largest superpower? What does my children's college experience look like if the United States is not the number one superpower in the world? If my children go into military service, what does that look like if we're the second largest military? Those are questions no generation, my parents didn't have to ask themselves that question. It wasn't until I get back to my grandparents. And that was the generation, yours and our grandparents were the ones that actually saw the rise of the United States. You know, there was a whole generation between them and us that never even had doubts, never had to wonder if the U.S. would be the biggest.
Yeah.
Right? And now you and I have to be ready to let our children graduate into a world where potentially they'll be number two.
Do you think there's a possibility that they are already more advanced?
No. I think there's always a probability. So CIA teaches us to look at all outcomes as probabilities, right? Probabilities and possibilities. So probability is valuable because it's numerical, it's calculatable, it's empirical. So there might be a 2% probability of something happening, which makes it very unlikely, but it's still a possibility, versus a 98% probability. A 98% probability makes something very possible, very likely, but still possibly not true, right? So you've got this large spectrum that you have to consider when you look at probabilities. So is the United States, or is China more advanced than the United States right now? Possibly, but not likely.
Why do you say that? Why do you say not likely?
Because you have to understand that China, starting in like 2001, 2002, early 2000s, they took a very different direction than the United States, right? When 9/11 happened, all of our resources went into terrorism, combating terrorism. Chinese didn't participate in that war, right? So what they did is they used that time frame to start advancing, to start building the infrastructure that we had spent the previous 20 to 30 years building. Mm-hmm. China doesn't have wired telephone lines like we have in the United States. Any American knows what it's like to drive down any road in the United States and see telephone lines. You and I remember what it was like when you could only talk on telephone lines. The United States invented cellular signals. We invented cell phones. We invented cell towers. When the Chinese actually grew up to the place where they could become a first world country, they basically skipped past telephone lines and graduated directly into cellular era. So when our cell network goes down, we'll fall right back to telephone lines. When their cell network goes down, there is no backup.
Okay.
Right? People are going next door neighbor to next door neighbor. It's old school telephone. Tell the person in front of you to tell the person in front of them how things work.
Gotcha.
Right? So they have grown up on our advancement. That's where we are now. That's why you still see issues with intellectual property and you still see issues with corporate espionage and economic espionage. They grow by stealing, reverse engineering, and then programming from there. Maybe they'll make an incremental improvement on what they steal, but for the most part, they're just learning how what they steal even works. And it's not just us they do it to. They steal from Europe, they steal from Russia, They'll steal from everybody to get the whatever is the most advanced thing on the market. Whereas here in the United States, we tend to develop, innovate, create our own economic advantage, right? All the semiconductors and super chips that we're all worried about because they're built in Taiwan, they're all designed here. They're just built there because we don't have a manufacturing base anymore. So that's why I'm not worried that China is already more sophisticated. They beat us to the punch in some things. They've got hypersonic missiles. We're just developing them, right? They've got different technology on aircraft that they've been able to steal from Europe and the Middle East that we're still developing, right? But then you look at other things. Their aircraft carriers don't compare to our aircraft carriers. Their operational, organizational execution of military conflict, their approach to covert influence, or what we would call propaganda, is very, very much behind.
Really? You think they're behind?
They're behind in how they execute it because they have a state-run system. So they can basically blast fake news and withhold real news. That's rudimentary versus what we have in the United States, where free news, truthful news is out there and fake news is out there. That's a whole different, more sophisticated level of misinformation.
If China does take over if they become the world superpower by 2033, what you had mentioned, what does your life look like? Are you preparing for that? What, in your mind, what happens?
So I am preparing for that. My wife is some former CIA. We both have plans in place for what we would do in that situation. And there's something important that I want to make sure that you especially and anybody listening understands. If the United States is no longer the world's largest superpower, then two things happen almost immediately. First, being an American no longer has an advantage. Everything we talked about having $100 in your pocket as an EDC, or having an international credit card, which is most of the banking institutions are American banking institutions, all of that takes second place because now everybody's going to want an HSBC credit card. Now everybody's going to want to have a passport from China, right? If China becomes the world's global superpower, everybody wants to go with China. You and I have actually traveled the world, and we know you being a Caucasian male, you know exactly what it's like to step into a place and have everybody want your attention. Because once they hear your American accent, they think to themselves, money, power, connections. I mean, it's amazing how much influence outside of the United States being an American gets you. I'm an ambiguously brown guy with big hair. As soon as I pull out that blue passport that says United States on it, I mean, parts of the world open up to us that we've taken for granted because we've never remembered. We've never experienced a life where that little blue passport doesn't get you special perks and attention, right? Everybody wants to be friends with an American because they think America is the land of opportunity. It's the land of freedom. Most countries in the world do not know freedom and do not know opportunity. So when they meet us, we're their ticket. That's how everybody in the world, that's how the vast majority of the world sees Americans. Okay. Their ticket to opportunity, their potential ticket to freedom. If we're no longer the top of the food chain, then we lose that appeal. Because now all of a sudden, you need to have a Chinese passport to have the ticket. You need to have a Chinese identity or a Chinese genetic background for people to take and pay attention to you, right? And that's going to be hard. That's going to be a big, drastic difference for the generation that is our children, because like they're going to know what it's like to have been 13, 14, 15 years old, an American, but then be 23, 24, 25, young professionals starting their careers and be second-class citizens, essentially.
Yeah.
Right? So our plan is that if that's the direction that it goes, we're leaving the United States. There is no advantage to being an American inside the United States if you can basically rebuild your identity somewhere else.
Interesting.
So we would actually immigrate, most likely to Europe, because Europe will still be pro-US, right? If anything, Europe and the United States are going to be fighting a Chinese hegemony for probably the next 30 years. So go to Europe and essentially establish ourselves as dual-docked citizens. Spend 5 years in Portugal, 5 years in Spain, potentially get into Italy, spend 3 to 5 years building residency somewhere, working towards an EU citizenship, because then you'd become dual docked EU and US. Whenever you're on the losing side of a battle, which nobody likes to talk about, but whenever you're on the losing side of a battle, sometimes the next best thing to do is to blend in and look like a non-threat. If you have a Spanish passport or a Portuguese passport, do you feel intimidated by Spain or Portugal?
No.
So neither will a Chinese. But people, if you're in second place, people feel intimidated by you. So if I had to pick how I was going to travel the world when my children are 25 and I'm in my 60s, I'd rather travel the world under an EU passport as a dual docked citizen than travel under a US passport and potentially draw the attention and the ire of the world superpower.
Interesting. I love that train of thought. I am surprised to hear you say Europe, considering it's, everything that's going on over there right now.
Oh, yeah.
I've thought about this too. My place, I believe, would be Paraguay.
Yes. So Latin America and the Bahamas too. Well, the Bahamas are part of Latin America. You're thinking on the exact same lines. The main difference, the main reason I wouldn't go south is because first world electricity, first world internet, first world medicine, even if it's on the decline, it'll take probably 2 generations before it fully declines in a first world country. Mm-hmm. So if you're in Italy, Spain, Germany, Poland, the UK, it's going to take 30 to 50 years before that infrastructure actually falls into such disarray because of a lack of economic stimulation. We're talking end times, right? If the world actually starts to decline because the new superpower basically imposes their will on the whole world, if that actually were to happen, it would take decades before those institutions degraded to a place where we would feel it in our everyday lives. But in a place like Paraguay, Costa Rica, Nicaragua, Chile, that same degradation would probably happen in about 15 to 20 years. So now you or I might be a 75-year-old man living on a healthcare system in a country that's falling apart. If we're in Latin America. If we're in Europe, we're a 75 or 80-year-old man in a country that still has 25 years more ahead of it of working healthcare system.
Hey everybody, I'm Shawn Ryan. Click here to subscribe to the Shawn Ryan Show YouTube channel for the hottest and most compelling interviews that you will not see anywhere else. I've also made a playlist of all the previous SRS episodes so they're easy to find. You can find that right here.